I remember the automatic doors of the hospital sliding open with a soft whoosh, ushering me into the bustling lobby. It was bright inside, too bright, the kind of sterile light that makes everything look sharper and more exposed. My heart was pounding, my breath coming in uneven bursts as I stepped forward, clutching the baby tightly in my arms. She was wrapped in the softest pink blanket I owned, a little bundle of warmth that felt impossibly fragile and precious. I hadn't planned on being here, not really. For weeks, I had been wrestling with what to do, the weight of the decision bearing down on me like a leaden sky. But that morning, as the sun filtered through my kitchen window, casting golden light over the cracked porcelain teacup in my hands, I knew I couldn't wait any longer. The baby needed more than I could give her. She deserved more. The hospital lobby was alive with movement, doctors and nurses in scrubs hurrying from one place to another, patients waiting in chairs with weary faces, the faint sound of a coffee machine humming in the corner. I stood there for a moment, frozen, the weight of what I was about to do pressing down on me. My knees felt unsteady, and I adjusted my grip on the baby, her soft breath brushing against my neck. "Excuse me, ma'am," a voice said, startling me. I turned to see a young man in a security uniform, his expression kind but curious. "Can I help you with something?" I opened my mouth to respond, but the words didn't come. My throat felt tight, as though the enormity of what I needed to say had lodged itself there, refusing to budge. I looked down at the baby instead, her tiny face serene and peaceful, completely unaware of the storm inside me. "I need to see someone," I said finally, my voice trembling. "Someone who can help." The man's brow furrowed slightly, but he nodded. "Of course. Let me take you to the front desk." The receptionist was a woman in her 50s, with a neat bob of gray hair and a name tag that read Karen. She greeted me with a polite smile, though her eyes flicked curiously to the bundle in my arms. "What can we do for you today?" she asked. I hesitated again, my pulse racing. How could I explain this? How could I put into words the tangle of emotions that had brought me here, the fear, the guilt, the love, the hope? I swallowed hard and took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "I have a baby," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "And I need someone to take care of her." Karen's smile faltered, replaced by a look of quiet concern. "Are you the child's mother?" she asked gently. "No," I said quickly, shaking my head. "I'm not her mother. But I know who she belongs to." Karen exchanged a glance with the security guard, then stood, her movements calm and deliberate. "Why don't we find somewhere quiet to talk?" she said, her tone soothing. "Would that be all right?" I nodded, grateful for the suggestion. My legs felt like jelly, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could stand. As Karen led me down a corridor to a small room with a table and chairs, I couldn't help but notice the way people glanced at me as I passed. Their eyes flicked to the baby, then back to me, their expressions a mix of curiosity and sympathy. Once we were inside the room, Karen gestured for me to sit. I lowered myself into a chair, cradling the baby against my chest as though she might slip away if I loosened my grip. Karen sat across from me, her hands folded neatly on the table. "Take your time," she said, her voice gentle. "There's no rush." I looked down at the baby, her tiny features so perfect it made my chest ache. Her little hand peeked out from the blanket, her fingers curling and uncurling as if reaching for something. For someone. I felt tears sting the corners of my eyes, and I blinked them away, determined to keep my composure. "She doesn't have anyone," I said finally, my voice breaking. "Her parents, they're gone." Karen's expression softened, and I saw the faintest hint of tears in her eyes. "I'm so sorry," she said quietly. "Were they family? Friends?" "Friends," I said, though the word felt inadequate to describe the bond one had shared with them. "Her mother was like a daughter to me. And her father, he was the kind of man who made everyone around him feel safe." Karen nodded, her eyes never leaving mine. "And you've been caring for the baby since?" "Since she was born," I said, my voice trembling. "It's been 3 weeks. But I can't give her what she needs." I'm too old, and I don't have the strength. She needs a family. A real family. The room grew quiet, the weight of my words settling over us like a heavy blanket. Karen reached across the table and placed her hand over mine, her touch warm and steady. "You're doing the right thing," she said softly. "I know this must be so difficult, but you're giving her a chance at a better life. That's an incredible gift." Her kindness undid me, and the tears I had been holding back spilled over. I clutched the baby tighter, my shoulders shaking as the sobs came, raw and uncontrollable. Karen didn't speak, didn't try to stop me. She simply let me cry, her presence a quiet reassurance that I wasn't alone. When the tears subsided, I looked down at the baby again, my vision blurred but clear enough to see her little face. "I just want her to be loved," I said, my voice a whisper. "That's all I want." Karen nodded, her own eyes shining with unshed tears. "We'll make sure of that," she said. "I promise." Karen let me sit there for a while, letting the quiet fill the space as I cradled the baby in my arms. Her presence was steady, not intrusive, and for that, I was grateful. The baby stirred slightly, letting out a soft whimper, and I instinctively rocked her, murmuring soothing words that felt both natural and deeply unfamiliar. When I felt ready, I looked up at Karen. "I suppose I need to explain," I said, my voice still shaky. "You'll want to know who she is, and who her parents were." Karen nodded, leaning forward slightly but not rushing me. "Whenever you're ready," she said. "Take your time." I took a deep breath, my gaze falling to the baby once more. "Her name is Emma," I began. "Her mother, Lila, well, she was like a daughter to me. Not by blood, but in all the ways that mattered." Karen's eyes softened, and she gave a small nod of encouragement. I appreciated her patience. It made it easier to continue. "I met Lila when she was just a teenager," I said. "She'd had a hard life, her parents weren't in the picture, and she'd been shuffled through the foster system. When she aged out, she was completely on her own." I paused, the memory surfacing in sharp detail. "She started working at the bakery I used to run. She was so shy, so uncertain of herself, but she had this quiet determination that I couldn't ignore. I took her under my wing, I suppose. Gave her a job, a place to stay when she needed it. Over time, we became close." My hands trembled slightly as I adjusted the blanket around Emma. "Lila stayed in my life even after she left the bakery. She met someone, a young man named Henry. He was kind, hardworking, the sort of person you just knew you could trust. They got married a few years later, and I was there for every step of it. I was their family, I suppose, since they didn't have much of one." Karen listened quietly, her expression calm but attentive. "It sounds like you meant a great deal to them," she said softly. "I hope so," I said, my voice trembling. "They certainly meant the world to me. When Lila told me she was expecting, I couldn't have been happier. She was over the moon, and Henry, oh, he was going to be such a wonderful father. He doted on her every moment, always making sure she was cared for." I paused, my chest tightening as the next part of the story loomed. But things didn't go as planned. Karen's brow furrowed, her eyes searching mine. "What happened?" she asked gently. "There was an accident," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "A car accident. Henry didn't survive. Lila was taken to the hospital, and they saved Emma, but not her mother." I felt the tears start again, hot and relentless. The grief of it was still raw, still clawing at my chest every time I thought about that night. Karen reached across the table again, her hand resting over mine. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "That must have been devastating." "It was," I said, wiping at my eyes with my free hand. "It still is. But when I held Emma for the first time, it was like a piece of Lila and Henry was still here. Like they had left behind something pure, something good." Karen was quiet for a moment, letting my words settle. "And you've been caring for her since the accident?" she asked. I nodded. "Yes. I brought her home from the hospital, and I've done my best. But I'm 70. I don't have the energy I used to. She needs more than I can give her. She deserves more. Karen's expression softened, and I could see the understanding in her eyes. You've done an incredible thing, she said. You gave her a safe place, love, stability. That's no small thing. I know, I said, my voice breaking. But I can't be her mother. She needs someone younger, someone who can give her everything she needs. I just want her to have a good life. Karen nodded, her hand still resting on mine. We can help, she said. We'll make sure she finds a family that loves her, one that can give her everything she needs. The weight of her words both comforted and devastated me. This was what I had come here for, what I knew had to happen. But the thought of letting Emma go, of placing her in someone else's arms, felt like breaking my own heart. Will I ever know where she goes? I asked hesitantly. Will I ever see her again? We can work with the adoption agency to make sure you stay informed, Karen said. It'll be up to the adoptive family, but we'll do everything we can to honor your connection to her. I nodded, though the thought felt hollow. I wanted to believe it, but I knew that once Emma left my arms, I might never see her again. Karen stood, her movements calm and deliberate. Let me call one of our social workers, she said. They'll help us figure out the next steps. Thank you, I said, my voice barely audible. As she left the room, I looked down at Emma again, my tears falling freely now. She stirred in my arms, her tiny fingers brushing against my chest, and I leaned down to kiss her forehead. I love you, little one, I whispered. Always. The room felt quieter after Karen left, though the muffled sounds of the hospital beyond the door remained constant. I sat there, cradling Emma in my arms, trying to memorize every detail of her tiny face. Her delicate eyelashes, the soft curve of her cheeks, the faint wisps of dark hair that peeked out from beneath the pink blanket. Each breath she took, each tiny movement, felt like both a gift and a reminder of what I was about to lose. The door opened softly, and I looked up to see a woman entering the room. She was in her late 30s, with warm brown eyes and a calm, professional demeanor. Her name tag read Jessica, and she carried a clipboard in one hand, a soft smile on her face. Hello, Mrs. Harper, she said, her tone kind and soothing. I'm Jessica, one of the social workers here. Karen asked me to come speak with you. I nodded, shifting Emma slightly in my arms. Thank you for coming, I said, though my voice sounded distant to my own ears. Jessica took a seat across from me, setting the clipboard down on the table. I know this must be a difficult time for you, she said. But I want you to know that we're here to help, and we'll make sure Emma is placed with a family who will love and care for her. Her words were gentle, but they still hit like a blow to the chest. I nodded again, swallowing hard. I just want her to have a good life, I said, my voice trembling. That's all I want. Jessica leaned forward slightly, her gaze steady and compassionate. You've already given her so much, Mrs. Harper, she said. Taking her in after everything that happened, giving her a safe and loving start, it's clear how much you care about her. I felt a tear slip down my cheek, and I quickly wiped it away. It doesn't feel like enough, I admitted. I wish I could do more. You've done more than most people could, Jessica said. And recognizing that she needs more than you can give her, that's one of the most selfless things you could do. Her words offered a small measure of comfort, though the ache in my chest remained. What happens now? I asked, forcing myself to focus on the practicalities. Well, Jessica said, glancing at her clipboard, the first step is to get some information about Emma and her parents. You've already told Karen a bit, but I'll need to record some additional details for our records. After that, we'll work with an adoption agency to find a family for Emma. The word adoption felt heavy in the air, final and absolute. I adjusted the blanket around Emma, trying to keep my hands steady. How long does it take? I asked hesitantly. To find a family? It depends, Jessica said. But because Emma is so young, I imagine the process will move quickly. There are many families hoping to adopt an infant. Her words were meant to be reassuring, and in some ways, they were. But they also reminded me that Emma's time with me was slipping away faster than I had imagined. Jessica's voice softened. We'll do our best to keep you informed throughout the process. And if you'd like, we can work with the adoptive family to arrange updates, letters, photos, things like that. It's called an open adoption. Would that be something you'd want? I nodded quickly, the thought of knowing where Emma was and how she was doing bringing a sliver of comfort. Yes, I said. I'd like that. Jessica pulled out a pen and began asking me questions, about Emma's birth, about Lila and Henry, about the accident that had taken them both away. The details were painful to recount, each memory like a wound I was reopening, but I forced myself to answer. Emma deserved to have her story told, even if she was too young to understand it now. When Jessica asked about my connection to Lila and Henry, I found myself talking about the bakery, about the years we had shared, and about the deep bond that had formed between us. They were like family to me, I said, my voice thick with emotion. Lila called me Mum sometimes, just to tease me. But I think she meant it. Jessica nodded, her expression warm and understanding. It sounds like you were a big part of their lives. They were a big part of mine, I said. And now Emma is all that's left of them. When the questions were done, Jessica set her pen down and folded her hands in her lap. You've given us everything we need, she said. Thank you for sharing so much with me. I know it wasn't easy. I nodded, clutching Emma a little tighter. What happens next? I asked again, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. We'll arrange for Emma to stay with a temporary foster family while we work to find her a permanent home, Jessica said. The foster family will make sure she's cared for in the meantime. The words felt like a punch to the gut, and I had to take a deep breath to steady myself. Will I get to meet them? I asked. If that's something you'd like, Jessica said, we can make it happen. I'd like that, I said quickly. I need to know she's going to someone kind. Jessica nodded, her expression calm and reassuring. Of course. As the conversation wound down, I felt the weight of exhaustion settling over me. The emotions of the day, the weeks of sleepless nights leading up to it, and the sheer magnitude of what I was doing, it was all catching up to me. Jessica seemed to sense it and stood, gathering her clipboard. Why don't I give you a moment, she said gently. I'll check on the arrangements and be back shortly. Thank you, I said softly. When the door closed behind her, I looked down at Emma once more. She was awake now, her big, curious eyes looking up at me as if searching for answers I couldn't give her. I traced a finger along her cheek, marveling at how soft her skin was. I hope you know how much you're loved, I whispered. I hope you never, ever doubt it. The room felt unbearably quiet after Jessica left. I cradled Emma close, her soft gurgles the only sound breaking through the silence. My heart ached in ways I couldn't fully describe, and my hands trembled as I adjusted her blanket for what felt like the 100th time. I knew the moment was coming, the one where I would have to hand her over, but every second that passed felt like both a reprieve and a torment. When Jessica returned, her expression was warm but tinged with something I couldn't quite place. Compassion, maybe. Or the weight of knowing how hard this would be for me. She sat down across from me again, her movements calm and deliberate. We've contacted a foster family, she said softly. They're on their way now. Her words hit me like a blow, and for a moment, I couldn't speak. I looked down at Emma, her tiny hand gripping my finger, and felt the tears rise again. Who are they? I asked, my voice trembling. Can you tell me about them? Of course, Jessica said, her tone reassuring. Their names are Sarah and David. They've been fostering children for about 5 years now, and they're wonderful with infants. They have a 3-year-old daughter of their own and live just outside of town. I nodded, trying to let the details sink in. Sarah and David. A young family, experienced and kind. It was what I wanted for Emma, what I knew she needed. But the knowledge didn't make it any easier. Jessica paused, letting me process the information before continuing. If you'd like, we can have a conversation with them when they arrive. You can ask them any questions you have, and we'll make sure you feel comfortable before we move forward. Yes, I said quickly, the thought of meeting them bringing a small measure of relief. I'd like that. Jessica smiled, her warmth cutting through some of the heaviness in the room. All right. I'll stay with you until they get here. She leaned back slightly, giving me space, but remaining present. For a few minutes, we sat in silence, the only sounds coming from Emma's soft coos and the distant hum of hospital activity beyond the door. It was a strange kind of calm, the kind that settles just before everything changes. When there was a knock at the door, my breath caught in my throat. Jessica stood and opened it, revealing a young couple standing in the hallway. The woman, Sarah, was petite with kind eyes and a warm smile. David was tall, with an easy demeanor and an expression of quiet sincerity. They stepped inside, their movements careful and respectful, and my heart clenched at the sight of them. Mrs. Harper, this is Sarah and David, Jessica said, gesturing toward the couple. Sarah and David, this is Maureen. It's so nice to meet you, Sarah said, her voice soft but genuine. We've heard so much about you. I managed a small smile, though my chest felt tight. It's nice to meet you too, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Sarah's eyes shifted to Emma, and her expression softened immediately. Oh, she's beautiful, she said, her voice tinged with awe. May I? She didn't finish the sentence, but I knew what she was asking. I hesitated, my arms tightening instinctively around Emma. The thought of letting her go, even for a moment, felt unbearable. But then I looked at Sarah, at the tenderness in her eyes, and I knew I had to trust her. Slowly, I nodded. Yes. Of course. I stood, my legs unsteady, and stepped toward Sarah. She held out her arms, her movements careful and deliberate, and I placed Emma into them with a mix of reluctance and reverence. The moment Emma left my arms, a piece of me felt like it was breaking, but I forced myself to stay steady. Sarah cradled Emma as though she were the most precious thing in the world, her eyes brimming with emotion. Hi, sweetheart, she murmured, her voice soft and full of warmth. You're so loved already. David stepped closer, looking down at Emma with an expression of quiet awe. She's perfect, he said, his voice thick with emotion. He glanced at me then, his gaze steady. Thank you for trusting us with her. We know how much this must mean to you. His words undid me, and I felt the tears spill over again. She's everything, I said, my voice trembling. Her parents, they were my family. And she's the last piece of them I have. Sarah looked up at me, her own eyes glistening with tears. We'll take care of her, she said firmly. We'll love her with everything we have. I nodded, unable to speak, my chest tight with a mixture of grief and gratitude. Jessica stepped in then, her voice gentle but steady. Why don't we all sit for a moment, she suggested. We can talk through any questions Maureen has. We sat together, the four of us, as I tried to gather my thoughts. I asked about their home, their routines, their plans for Emma. Sarah and David answered every question with patience and sincerity, their love for Emma already evident in every word. They spoke about their daughter, about the family dinners and bedtime stories that filled their evenings, and I felt a faint flicker of hope amidst the ache in my chest. When the conversation wound down, Jessica looked at me with quiet encouragement. How do you feel, Mrs. Harper? She asked. I hesitated, my gaze falling to Emma once more. She was nestled in Sarah's arms, her tiny hand gripping the edge of the blanket. I paused, searching for the right words. I feel like I'm doing the right thing. Even if it hurts. Sarah reached out then, her free hand resting lightly on mine. You're giving her the greatest gift, she said softly. And we'll make sure she knows how much she was loved from the very beginning. Her words broke something open in me, and I nodded, my tears falling freely now. Thank you, I whispered. Thank you for loving her. David placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder, his expression solemn but kind. "She'll always be part of your family," he said. "We'll make sure of it." When Sarah and David left with Emma, the room seemed to collapse inward with the absence of her tiny presence. I had spent every moment of the past 3 weeks caring for her, holding her, watching her sleep, marveling at her tiny fingers and the way she would grip my hand as though anchoring herself to the world. Now, my arms felt empty, and the ache in my chest swelled until I thought it might consume me. Jessica stayed for a moment longer, sitting quietly beside me. She didn't rush me or fill the silence with platitudes. Instead, she waited, letting me gather myself as the tears continued to fall. "It's normal to feel this way," she said softly after a while. "You've loved her deeply, and you've done an extraordinary thing by giving her a chance at a new life." I nodded, though the weight of her words felt unbearable. I don't know how to say goodbye," I said, my voice trembling. "I don't know how to let her go." Jessica reached out, her hand resting lightly on my arm. "You're not saying goodbye forever," she said gently. "With an open adoption, you'll still have a connection to her. And one day, she'll know how much you did for her." Her words offered a small measure of comfort, but the ache in my heart remained. "I hope she knows how much I love her," I whispered. "That I only did this because I wanted the best for her." "She will," Jessica said firmly. "Sarah and David will make sure of it." The hours after they left were a blur. Jessica stayed with me for a while longer, helping me gather my things and arranging for a cab to take me home. I walked out of the hospital feeling like I was leaving a piece of myself behind, the weight of the decision pressing down on me with every step. The cab ride home was quiet, the driver respecting my silence as I stared out the window, watching the city pass by in a blur of lights and motion. When we arrived at my small house, I paid him and stepped inside, the emptiness of the space hitting me like a wave. Everything looked the same, the neat rows of books on the shelves, the crocheted blanket draped over the arm of the couch, the photos of Lila and Henry that lined the walls. But everything felt different. The house was too quiet, too still, and the absence of Emma's soft coos and cries made the silence almost unbearable. I sat down at the kitchen table, my hands trembling as I reached for the teacup I had left there that morning. The tea was cold now, the warmth long since faded, and I traced the rim of the cup with my finger, trying to steady myself. Lila and Henry's faces stared back at me from the photograph on the wall, their smiles frozen in time. It was taken on their wedding day, a day filled with so much hope and love. I remembered the way Henry had looked at Lila, as though she was his entire world, and the way Lila had laughed, her joy so infectious that everyone around her couldn't help but smile. "I hope I made you proud," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I hope I did right by her." The days that followed were some of the hardest I had ever faced. The house felt emptier than ever, and I found myself reaching for the bassinet in the corner of the living room, only to remember that Emma wasn't there. The nights were the worst, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening for sounds that would never come. But amidst the grief, there were moments of light. Sarah and David sent updates, just as they had promised. A week after Emma went to live with them, I received the first letter. It came with a photograph of Emma lying on a soft blanket, her tiny face peaceful and serene. "Dear Mrs. Harper," the letter began. "Thank you again for trusting us with Emma. She's settling in beautifully, and our daughter, Lily, is already smitten with her new little sister. Emma loves being held and rocked, and she makes the sweetest little sounds when she's falling asleep. We hope this photo brings you some comfort. Please know that she is deeply loved." Tears streamed down my face as I read the words, my hands trembling as I held the photo. Seeing Emma's face again, even in a picture, filled me with a bittersweet joy. She looked happy, content, and I clung to the knowledge that she was in good hands. The updates continued to come every few weeks. Each letter brought news of Emma's growth, her first smile, the way she would giggle when Lily played peekaboo with her, the milestones she was reaching. Sarah and David included photos with every letter, each one a glimpse into the life Emma was building with them. As the months passed, I found myself slowly healing. The ache of letting her go never truly disappeared, but it softened with time, replaced by a quiet sense of peace. I kept every letter, every photo, tucking them into a special box that I kept by my bed. They were my lifeline to Emma, a reminder that she was thriving and loved. One day, I received a letter that brought me to tears. It was from Sarah, as usual, but this time it included a note written in crayon, signed by Lily. "Thank you for giving me my baby sister," the note read, the letters uneven but filled with love. I held the note to my chest, the tears flowing freely. In that moment, I knew I had done the right thing. Emma had found a family who loved her deeply, a family who would give her the life she deserved. The pain of letting her go would always be part of me, but so would the joy of knowing she was safe and cherished. As I sat by the window that evening, the sun casting a warm glow over the garden, I closed my eyes and whispered a quiet prayer. "Be happy, my sweet Emma. Always." The letters and photos from Sarah and David became a lifeline for me, something I looked forward to with equal parts anticipation and bittersweet longing. Each time one arrived, I would carefully open the envelope, smoothing the creases in the paper and savoring every word. They painted a picture of Emma's life, her growth, her milestones, the laughter she brought to her family. The ache of her absence remained, but it was tempered by the knowledge that she was loved and thriving. Months turned into a year, and with each update, I found myself smiling more. Emma's first birthday brought a photo of her with a small cake, her chubby hands covered in frosting as Lily beamed beside her. "She's walking now," the letter read. "Her first steps were wobbly, but she's already chasing Lily around the house. She's fearless and curious, always exploring." I pinned the photo to the bulletin board in my kitchen, alongside others they had sent. The board had become a shrine of sorts, a testament to Emma's growing life. Every time I passed it, I felt a mixture of pride and sadness, a reminder of the connection I had let go but would never truly lose. The pain of those early days, when the house felt too quiet and empty, began to ease. I started to find solace in the routines of my life, the quiet hours spent tending to my garden, the afternoons volunteering at the local library, the evenings with my knitting needles clicking softly as the radio played in the background. Slowly, I began to reclaim pieces of myself, the parts one had put on hold when Lila and Henry's lives became intertwined with mine. But Emma was always there, in the back of my mind and the corner of my heart. One afternoon, as I walked through the neighborhood park, I noticed a mother and her young child playing near the swings. The child, no older than 2, giggled as her mother pushed her higher and higher, her laughter ringing out like a melody. For a moment, I stood frozen, the sight of them tugging at something deep inside me. Emma would be about that age now, I thought. I wondered if she loved the swings too, if Sarah or David pushed her while Lily cheered her on. The thought brought a pang of longing, but it was softened by the knowledge of where she was, and how happy she must be. It was during one of my volunteer shifts at the library that the idea came to me. I was shelving books in the children's section, marveling at the bright, colorful covers that filled the shelves, when a little boy approached me with a picture book in his hands. "Can you read this to me?" he asked, his wide eyes full of hope. I hesitated for only a moment before smiling and sitting down on the small, cushioned bench. As I read to him, his expression shifted from curiosity to delight, his laughter bubbling up at the funny parts. Other children began to gather around, their little faces eager as they listened. When I finished, they clapped, their joy contagious. One of the parents, who had been watching from a nearby table, approached me. "You have a way with them," she said, smiling warmly. "You should do story time here." The idea planted itself firmly in my mind. By the time I returned home that evening, I was already sketching out plans for a weekly storytime session at the library. Storytime became my new purpose, something that brought light and energy back into my life. Every Wednesday, I sat on a colorful rug surrounded by children, reading stories and watching their faces light up with wonder. It wasn't the same as holding Emma in my arms, but it was a way to channel the love I had for her into something that mattered. The parents often stayed to chat after story time, sharing stories about their children and thanking me for the joy I brought to their little ones. Over time, I began to feel a sense of connection with the community, a sense of belonging that had been missing for so long. One day, after a particularly lively story time, I returned home to find an envelope waiting in my mailbox. It was from Sarah and David, and my heart leapt as I carried it inside. I opened it carefully, as I always did, and smiled at the photo that fell out. Emma was grinning up at the camera, a little dandelion clutched in her hand. "She loves picking flowers in the garden," the letter read. "We can't wait to tell her about the woman who gave her the beautiful name Emma, and how much she's loved by her." Tears filled my eyes as I read the letter, my chest swelling with a mix of pride and longing. Emma was thriving, and I had been a part of that. It wasn't the life I had envisioned, but it was the life she deserved. In the months that followed, I found myself smiling more often. The sadness that had once weighed me down had become something softer, something I carried with me but no longer let define me. Emma's presence was still with me, in the letters and photos, in the memories of her tiny fingers curling around mine. And in the laughter of the children at story time, I found a way to honor her and the love I had for her. Life wasn't perfect, but it was full. And for that, I was grateful. It had been nearly 2 years since I first walked into the hospital with Emma cradled in my arms. 2 years of letters and photos from Sarah and David, of watching Emma grow from a distance, of slowly finding my footing in a life that felt both fuller and emptier without her. I had learned to carry the ache of missing her alongside the joy of knowing she was loved, and though the balance wasn't always easy, it had become part of who I was. One day, as I was sorting books at the library, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I glanced at the screen and saw an unfamiliar number. Normally, I would have ignored it, letting it go to voicemail, but something urged me to answer. "Hello?" I said, tucking the phone between my ear and shoulder as I continued shelving. "Mrs. Harper?" a familiar voice asked. "This is Sarah." My heart skipped a beat at the sound of her name, and I immediately stopped what I was doing. "Sarah. It's so good to hear from you. How is Emma?" "She's wonderful," Sarah said, her voice warm and bright. "She's growing like a weed and keeps us on our toes. But I'm actually calling because, well, we wanted to ask you something." "Of course," I said, my voice filled with both curiosity and a hint of nerves. "What is it?" There was a brief pause on the other end of the line before Sarah spoke again. "We were wondering if you'd like to come visit us. To see Emma." The words took a moment to register, and when they did, my breath caught in my throat. "You mean, you want me to meet her?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Yes," Sarah said gently. "David and I have talked about it a lot, and we think it's important for Emma to know you. You've been such a big part of her story, and we want her to have that connection." Tears sprang to my eyes, and I gripped the edge of the shelf for support. "I would love that," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I would love nothing more." Sarah's relief was palpable, and we spent the next few minutes making arrangements. They lived only an hour's drive away, and we settled on the following Saturday for my visit. When I hung up the phone, I leaned against the shelf, my heart racing with a mix of excitement and nerves. The days leading up to the visit passed in a blur. I busied myself with preparations, baking a batch of cookies to bring and carefully selecting a small stuffed bunny as a gift for Emma. But as the day drew closer, my nerves grew stronger. Would she recognize me from the photos Sarah and David had shown her? Would she be shy, or worse, afraid of me? The questions swirled in my mind, each one more daunting than the last. When Saturday finally arrived, I dressed in my best blouse and slacks, smoothing the wrinkles with trembling hands. I packed the cookies and the bunny into a small bag, then sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the clock. It was almost time to leave, and my stomach churned with anticipation. The drive to Sarah and David's house felt longer than it was, my hands gripping the wheel tightly as I navigated the quiet suburban streets. When I pulled into their driveway, I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. The house was charming, with a white picket fence and a garden full of colorful flowers. It looked like the kind of home where love thrived. The front door opened before I could knock, and Sarah appeared, her smile warm and welcoming. "Mrs. Harper," she said, stepping outside to greet me. we're so glad you're here. Maureen, please, I said, returning her smile as she ushered me inside. David appeared in the hallway, carrying a basket of toys. He greeted me with the same warmth, and I felt some of my nerves begin to ease. But it wasn't until I heard the sound of tiny footsteps that my heart truly leapt. Emma, Sarah called gently. Come say hello. Emma appeared around the corner, her curls bouncing as she walked hesitantly into the room. She was holding a stuffed bear, her big, curious eyes taking in the sight of me. My breath caught as I took her in. She was so much bigger now, her features more defined but still achingly familiar. Hi, sweetheart, I said softly, kneeling to her level. I'm Maureen. It's so nice to meet you. She looked at me for a long moment, her little brow furrowed in concentration. Then, to my astonishment, she held out her bear. Bear, she said simply, her voice small but confident. I smiled, my heart swelling with love. Bear is beautiful, I said, reaching out to touch its soft fur. Thank you for showing me. She smiled then, a shy but radiant smile that lit up her entire face. I felt tears prick my eyes, and I quickly blinked them away, not wanting to overwhelm her. The rest of the visit was filled with quiet moments of connection. Emma showed me her toys, toddled around the living room, and even let me hold her for a little while. Sarah and David watched with soft smiles, their love for Emma evident in every glance. When it was time to leave, Emma waved at me from the doorway, her little hand clutching the stuffed bunny I had brought. Bye, Maureen, she said, her words clear and sweet. I waved back, my heart full and aching at the same time. Bye, Emma. Be good, sweetheart. As I drove home, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The visit had been everything I had hoped for and more. Emma was happy, loved, and thriving, and I had been given the gift of being part of her life, even in this small way. The drive home after meeting Emma for the first time left me filled with a kind of joy I hadn't felt in years. My chest was lighter, my heart fuller, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like the ache of missing her had found a soft place to land. She was happy, thriving, and full of life. And she had smiled at me, that radiant, shy smile that I would carry in my heart forever. I spent the evening reflecting on every moment of the visit, replaying the sound of her voice and the sight of her toddling around the room. Sarah and David had been so warm, so welcoming, and I felt a renewed sense of gratitude for the home they had given Emma. The next letter came a few weeks later, but this time, it wasn't just a letter. Inside the envelope was a hand-drawn picture, Emma's scribbles in bright crayon, a swirl of colors that made me laugh out loud. Emma wanted to draw this for you, Sarah wrote. She's been talking about her visit with Maureen and showing everyone the bunny you gave her. We thought you might like to have a little piece of her creativity. I pinned the picture to my kitchen bulletin board, right next to the photo of her holding the dandelion. It was a simple gesture, but it meant the world to me. For the first time, I felt like I had a real connection to Emma, like I was becoming part of her story in a way that mattered. Over the next few months, Sarah and David invited me to visit again. The second visit was even better than the first. Emma was more confident this time, running up to show me her favorite doll as soon as I arrived. She let me braid her hair, her little hands fiddling with the hem of her dress as she sat patiently on my lap. You're very good at that, Sarah said, watching as I tied a ribbon at the end of Emma's braid. Do you have experience with little ones? I hesitated, then smiled. I used to braid Lila's hair, I said softly. She always wanted it just so, with 2 matching bows. Sarah's expression grew thoughtful, and she nodded. Emma loves it too. I think she trusts you already. As the visits became more frequent, my bond with Emma deepened. She started calling me Riini, her own version of my name, and every time she said it, my heart melted a little more. I brought her small gifts, a set of colorful building blocks, a tiny watering can for her garden adventures, and she would always greet me with a squeal of delight, her arms outstretched for a hug. Sarah and David were wonderfully open about including me in Emma's life. They sent updates more frequently, invited me to birthday parties, and even asked if I would like to come to one of her dance recitals. She talks about you all the time, Sarah said during one visit. She tells Lily that Riini is her special friend. The idea of being special to Emma filled me with a quiet joy I hadn't expected. I wasn't her mother, not in the way Sarah was, but I was part of her circle, her world. And that was more than I could have hoped for. One sunny afternoon, as Emma and I sat on the back porch of Sarah and David's house, she turned to me with a curious expression. Riini, she said, her little face serious, did you know my mommy? The question caught me off guard, but I nodded, my throat tightening. Yes, sweetheart, I said softly. I knew her very well. Emma's eyes widened. What was she like? She was kind and funny, I said, smiling at the memory. She had the biggest laugh, and she loved flowers, just like you do. Emma grinned at that, her fingers playing with the hem of her dress. Did she like dandelions too? She did, I said, leaning in close. And I think she would love to see you picking flowers and playing in the garden. Emma seemed satisfied with that answer, and she reached out to hug me tightly. I'm glad you knew her, she said. Tears stung my eyes, and I held her close, my heart full of gratitude for this moment, this little connection to Lila that lived on in Emma. The bond between us grew stronger with each visit, and Sarah and David continued to support and encourage it. They saw the joy Emma brought to my life and the way I lit up whenever I was near her. It was as though we were building a family of our own, a family built on love, understanding, and shared devotion to a little girl who had brought us all together. For the first time in years, I felt like my life had a new purpose. Emma wasn't just a memory of Lila and Henry, she was her own beautiful, bright presence, and I had the privilege of being part of her world. One evening, as I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea, I received a call from Sarah. Her voice was warm, but there was a hint of something deeper, something that felt like hope. Maureen, she said, we've been talking, and we were wondering, would you like to be Emma's honorary grandmother? The words took my breath away, and for a moment, I couldn't speak. You mean, I began, my voice trembling. You mean you want me to be part of her family? Yes, Sarah said simply. You already are. Tears spilled down my cheeks as I clutched the phone tightly. I would love that, I said, my voice breaking. More than anything. That night, as I sat by the window watching the stars, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. My bond with Emma had grown into something beautiful, something that honored Lila and Henry's memory while creating something new. I wasn't just a part of her past, I was a part of her future. And for that, I was endlessly grateful. The morning after Sarah's call, I woke up with a sense of renewed purpose. My heart was lighter than it had been in years, and I felt a warmth spread through me every time I thought about Sarah's words, you already are. Being Emma's honorary grandmother was more than I could have ever hoped for. It felt like I was finally finding my place, a way to honor Lila and Henry while stepping into a role that filled me with joy. Sarah and David invited me over the following weekend for what they called a family day. The term made my heart skip a beat. It was a small gathering, just us, with no particular occasion other than to celebrate our connection. When I arrived, Emma was the first to greet me, running out the front door, with her arms outstretched. Riini, she squealed, wrapping her little arms around my legs. Her curls bounced as she looked up at me with a grin. You're here. I'm here, sweetheart, I said, bending down to scoop her up. I wouldn't miss it. David appeared in the doorway, carrying a tray of lemonade, and waved me inside. Come on in, Maureen, he said with a smile. You're just in time to help us get the snacks ready. Inside, the house was filled with the sounds of laughter and the faint aroma of freshly baked cookies. Lily, Emma's older sister, was perched at the kitchen counter, arranging a tray of fruit with a level of concentration that made me smile. Hi, Maureen, she said brightly. Emma said you were coming. I wouldn't miss it, I said, setting Emma down so she could run to her sister's side. What are you making? Fruit kebabs. Lily said proudly, holding up a skewer threaded with colorful pieces of pineapple, grapes, and strawberries. They look beautiful, I said, reaching for a skewer to help. You've got quite the talent, Lily. She beamed at the compliment, and I felt a pang of affection for this little family that had welcomed me so warmly. The day was filled with simple joys, playing board games in the living room, watching Emma chase bubbles in the backyard, and sharing stories around the dining table. As I sat there, surrounded by their warmth and laughter, I felt like I had found a new kind of home. It wasn't the same as the life I'd had with Lila and Henry, but it was beautiful in its own way. After dinner, as the children played in the living room, Sarah brought out a small box. "Maureen," she said, her voice soft, "we have something for you." I looked up, surprised. "For me?" David nodded, his smile gentle. "It's a little something to show how much you mean to us, and to Emma." Sarah handed me the box, and I opened it carefully, my hands trembling slightly. Inside was a delicate gold necklace with a small pendant shaped like a heart. Engraved on the back were the words, "With love, from your family." Tears filled my eyes, and I looked up at them, my chest tightening with emotion. "It's beautiful," I whispered. "Thank you. Thank you so much." Sarah leaned forward, wrapping me in a hug. "You're part of this family, Maureen," she said. "You always have been." The necklace became a constant presence around my neck, a tangible reminder of the love and connection I had found with Sarah, David, and Emma. I wore it proudly, often finding myself touching the pendant absent-mindedly as I went about my day. It felt like a piece of Emma was always with me, even when I wasn't with her. As the weeks passed, I became more involved in their lives. Sarah would call to invite me to Emma's playdates at the park, or David would text me pictures of her latest adventures, dancing in the kitchen, painting at her little easel, or proudly holding up a tower of blocks she had built. Each update filled me with joy, and I cherished every moment I got to spend with her. One afternoon, as we sat in the garden together, Emma turned to me with a curious expression. "Riini," she said, tilting her head, "what's a grandma?" The question caught me off guard, and I hesitated for a moment. "Well," I said slowly, "a grandma is someone who loves you very much and is always there for you. She's part of your family." Emma considered this, her little brow furrowed in thought. Then she smiled and climbed into my lap. "You're my grandma," she declared, her voice firm and full of conviction. Tears pricked my eyes, and I wrapped my arms around her tightly. "Yes, sweetheart," I said softly. "I'm your grandma." The words stayed with me long after the day had ended. Emma had given me a title I hadn't dared hope for, a role that filled my heart in ways I couldn't describe. I knew I would never replace Lila's mother, but I also knew that love didn't have to replace, it could expand, making room for new connections and new beginnings. In the months that followed, our bond grew stronger. Emma's laughter became the soundtrack to my days, her hugs a source of warmth and comfort. I began to feel like I had found not only a family, but a renewed sense of purpose. Being her grandma was the greatest gift I could have ever imagined, and I embraced it with all my heart. The first Christmas I spent as Emma's honorary grandmother felt like a dream. The weeks leading up to it were filled with preparations that brought a kind of joy I hadn't felt in years. I knitted Emma a little red sweater with white snowflakes on the sleeves and baked tins of shortbread cookies to share with Sarah and David. Each stitch, every sprinkle of sugar, carried the excitement of being part of their holiday traditions for the first time. On Christmas morning, I arrived at Sarah and David's house, a basket of gifts tucked under my arm. Snow dusted the edges of the driveway, and the warm glow of lights from their windows spilled out into the crisp air. As I knocked on the door, I heard the familiar sound of Emma's laughter, a melody that warmed me more than any fireplace ever could. The door opened to reveal David, his face bright with a smile. "Merry Christmas, Maureen," he said, stepping aside to let me in. "Come on in, you're just in time." I stepped inside, immediately enveloped by the scent of cinnamon and pine. The tree stood in the corner of the living room, its branches adorned with twinkling lights and colorful ornaments. Emma and Lily sat on the floor beside it, surrounded by a sea of wrapping paper, their faces alight with joy. "Riini," Emma called, scrambling to her feet and running toward me. She threw her arms around my legs, her hug as fierce as ever. "You came. Of course I did, sweetheart, I said, kneeling to her level. I wouldn't miss Christmas with you for anything. The morning was filled with the magic of childhood wonder. We opened gifts together, the room filled with the sound of laughter and the occasional squeal of delight. When Emma unwrapped the sweater I had knitted, her eyes widened, and she held it up for everyone to see. It's so pretty, she exclaimed, running her fingers over the snowflakes. Can I wear it now? Of course, I said, helping her slip it on. The sweater was a little big, room to grow into, I had thought, but she twirled in it happily, as if it were the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. After presents, we gathered around the dining table for a feast. Sarah and David had gone all out, the table laden with dishes that smelled as wonderful as they looked. I sat between Emma and Lily, marveling at how easily they had accepted me into their family. Lily chatted excitedly about the dollhouse Santa had brought her, while Emma alternated between bites of mashed potatoes and animated tales of her favorite ornaments. At one point, Sarah raised her glass, a soft smile on her face. To Maureen, she said, her voice warm. For bringing so much love and light into our lives. The toast caught me off guard, and I felt tears prick my eyes as everyone raised their glasses. Thank you, I said, my voice trembling. But really, it's you who've brought light into mine. I don't know what I'd do without all of you. After dinner, we returned to the living room for a quieter moment by the fire. Emma curled up in my lap, her tiny hand clutching mine, her head resting against my chest. I held her close, stroking her curls as the warmth of the fire and the quiet hum of conversation enveloped us. Riini, she murmured sleepily, her voice muffled against my sweater. Do you think my mommy can see me? The question took my breath away, and I felt my heart ache with the bittersweet truth of it. I do, I said softly. I think she watches over you every day, and I think she's so proud of you. Emma looked up at me, her eyes wide and searching. And of you too? The lump in my throat grew, and I nodded. I hope so, sweetheart, I whispered. I hope she knows how much I love you. That night, as I returned home, the weight of the day's joy and reflection settled over me. The house felt warm and welcoming rather than empty, and I sat by the tree I had decorated alone weeks earlier. For the first time in years, it didn't feel lonely. The ornament sparkled in the soft glow of the lights, and I thought of Emma's laughter, of Lily's excitement, of Sarah and David's kindness. They weren't just Emma's family anymore, they were mine too. The new year arrived with a quiet sense of peace. Life continued in its familiar rhythm, story time at the library, quiet mornings in the garden, and regular visits to Sarah and David's home. Emma grew more vibrant with each passing day, her curiosity boundless and her laughter infectious. With every visit, I felt more deeply connected to her, to Lily, and to the family we had become together. One chilly afternoon in early spring, Sarah invited me over to help Emma with a craft project. She's been asking to make something special for you, Sarah said over the phone. I think it'll make her very happy if you're part of it. Curiosity piqued, I arrived at their home to find the dining table covered in a colorful array of supplies, construction paper, glue, markers, and glitter that sparkled like tiny stars. Emma was already sitting at the table, her hands sticky with glue and her face lit up with excitement. Riini! Look, she exclaimed, holding up a sheet of paper covered in glittery hearts. I'm making you a book. A book? I asked, smiling as I took a seat beside her. That sounds wonderful. What's it about? It's about you, she said proudly. And me, and Mommy, and everyone I love. My heart swelled at her words, and I leaned in to admire her work. Each page she had created was a kaleidoscope of colors and shapes, her little hands working diligently to piece it all together. I helped her cut out more shapes, adding my own contributions to the book, though she made it clear that she was the author and artist. When the book was finished, Emma flipped through the pages with pride. Each one was a snapshot of her world, drawings of flowers, stick figure portraits of her family, and a page dedicated to me, complete with a glittery heart and the words, Riini loves me. Tears welled in my eyes as I held the book. "This is the most beautiful gift I've ever received," I said, my voice trembling. "Thank you, sweetheart." Emma beamed, throwing her arms around me in a sticky hug. "You're my favorite grandma," she whispered, her words muffled against my sweater. I held her tightly, my chest aching with a mix of love and gratitude. "And you're my favorite little girl," I said softly. "Always." Later that evening, as Sarah and I cleaned up the remnants of the craft supplies, she turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "You've become such an important part of our lives," she said. "We can't imagine this family without you." Her words caught me off guard, and I felt a lump rise in my throat. "You've all given me so much," I said. "More than I ever thought I could have again." Sarah placed a hand on mine, her smile warm. "It's mutual," she said. "And I think Lila and Henry would be so proud of the love you brought into Emma's life." The mention of Lila and Henry brought a familiar ache, but it was softened by the knowledge that their memory was alive in Emma, in the bond we shared, and in the family that had grown around her. "I hope so," I said quietly. "I hope I've honored them." That spring, I decided to start a new project of my own. Inspired by Emma's handmade book, I began compiling a memory book for her, a collection of photos, letters, and stories about Lila and Henry. I included pictures from their wedding, handwritten notes Lila had left me during her bakery shifts, and little anecdotes about their lives. It was a labor of love, a way to preserve their legacy for Emma to one day understand. As I worked on the book, I found myself smiling more than crying, the memories bringing a sense of comfort rather than loss. When I presented the book to Sarah and David, they were moved to tears. "This is incredible, Maureen," Sarah said, flipping through the pages. "Thank you for giving her this." "She deserves to know where she came from," I said, my voice steady. "And to know how much she was loved even before she was born." David nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You've given her such a gift, Maureen. And us too." The memory book became a cherished part of Emma's life. On quiet afternoons, she would sit in my lap, her little fingers tracing the photos as I told her stories about her parents. She would ask questions, endless, curious questions, and I answered them all with as much honesty and love as I could. "Did Mommy love flowers like me?" she asked one day, her eyes wide with wonder. "She did," I said, smiling. "She loved daisies the most. She said they made her think of sunny days and happy moments." Emma grinned. "I like daisies too. Maybe I'll grow them in the garden." I kissed the top of her head, my heart full. "I think your mommy would love that." As the seasons changed, so did our family. The bond between us grew stronger, and I found myself looking forward to every moment I spent with Emma, Sarah, and David. Life wasn't always perfect, but it was rich with love, and I felt more connected to the world, and to myself, than I had in years. One evening, as I sat by my window watching the sunset, I thought of Lila and Henry. I thought of the laughter we had shared, the dreams they had carried, and the little girl they had left behind. And as I touched the pendant around my neck, I whispered a quiet promise. "I'll keep her safe. I'll love her as you would have. Always." The legacy of love they had left behind wasn't just in Emma, it was in all of us. And I would spend the rest of my life honoring it. Years passed in what felt like the blink of an eye. Emma grew from a curious, bubbly toddler into a bright and compassionate young girl. Every visit brought new milestones, her first day of school, her first soccer game, the first time she read a whole book aloud. With each passing year, our bond deepened, and I marveled at the person she was becoming. One summer afternoon, as we sat together in the garden, Emma looked up from the daisies she was carefully planting. "Reenie," she said, brushing dirt off her little hands, "do you think my mommy and daddy would like our garden?" The question, so innocent and full of love, brought a lump to my throat. I set down the watering can and knelt beside her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I think they would love it, Emma," I said. "Your mommy would be so proud of how much care you put into it. And your daddy, well, he'd probably be making silly jokes while helping you plant." Emma giggled at that, her smile lighting up her face. "I wish I could have met them," she said softly. But I'm glad I have you to tell me about them. My chest ached with a bittersweet kind of love, and I pulled her into a hug. And I'm glad I have you, sweetheart, I whispered. You're the best thing they ever gave me. The memory book I had created became a touchstone for us over the years. Emma loved sitting with it on rainy afternoons, asking me to retell her favorite stories about her parents. As she grew older, the questions became more thoughtful, more nuanced, and I answered each one with honesty, sharing both the joys and the heartbreak of their lives. Do you ever miss them? She asked one day, her voice quiet as she traced a photo of Lila with her finger. Every day, I said, my voice trembling. But having you in my life makes it easier. You're a piece of them, Emma. And every time I see you smile or hear you laugh, I feel like they're still here. She smiled at that, leaning her head against my shoulder. I like that, she said. It makes me feel close to them. Sarah and David continued to foster the connection between Emma and me. They invited me to every birthday, every recital, every important moment in Emma's life. I watched her grow and flourish, her world expanding with every new experience, and I felt a quiet pride in knowing I had played a small part in her journey. But it wasn't just Emma who grew. Over time, I found myself changing too. The ache of Lila and Henry's loss softened, replaced by a deep sense of purpose and gratitude. My life, once defined by grief, had become rich with love, laughter, and connection. Emma had given me more than I ever thought possible, a second chance at family, at joy, at hope. On Emma's 10th birthday, Sarah and David organized a small celebration in their backyard. The garden was in full bloom, the air filled with the scent of roses and freshly cut grass. Emma ran up to greet me as soon as I arrived, her excitement palpable. Riini, guess what? She exclaimed, tugging at my hand. I have a surprise for you. I let her lead me to the patio, where a table was set with a cake and a row of brightly wrapped presents. In the center was a small envelope with my name written in Emma's careful handwriting. This one's for you, she said, bouncing on her toes. I opened the envelope slowly, my hands trembling as I pulled out a folded piece of paper. Inside was a drawing of Emma and me standing in a garden, surrounded by flowers. Above us, in bold, colorful letters, were the words, "Thank you for being my grandma." Tears filled my eyes, and I looked up at Emma, who was watching me with a hopeful smile. Oh, Emma, I said, pulling her into a hug. This is the best gift I've ever received. You're the best grandma ever, she whispered. I love you, Riini. I love you too, sweetheart, I said, holding her close. Always. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the party wound down, I sat on a bench in the garden, watching Emma play with Lily. The sound of their laughter filled the air, blending with the hum of crickets and the rustling of leaves in the breeze. Sarah joined me, a soft smile on her face. She adores you, you know, she said. You've given her so much, more than we ever could have hoped for. I shook my head, tears brimming in my eyes. She's the one who's given me everything, I said. She's brought me back to life. Sarah placed a hand on mine, her gaze steady. You've made this family whole, Maureen. And I know Lila and Henry would be so proud of you, and so grateful. As I drove home that night, I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me. Life had come full circle in a way I never could have imagined. Emma was the bridge between the past and the future, a reminder that love could endure even the deepest loss. When I walked into my house, I paused by the bulletin board, now crowded with photos, drawings, and letters from Emma. I added the birthday drawing to the collection, my heart full of gratitude and joy. I'll keep loving you, Emma, I whispered into the quiet room. Forever and always. And I knew, without a doubt, that the love I carried for Emma, for Lila, and for Henry would be my greatest legacy. If you've enjoyed my story, please leave your comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my YouTube channel, where your support means the world to me. I look forward to bringing you more stories that inspires growth, joy, and purpose. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next video.